and welcome back everybody to the close of another week, but to the start of the third of our facilitation sessions. It's great to see people coming back in. Hopefully we'll have a few more joining us as we get started, but regardless, it's great to see what are already familiar faces. So today, I don't think there's anyone I don't recognize, but just in case, my name is Nate Stevens. I'm a facilitation and collective impact consultant based in Washington, D.C. And I've been working with the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation on bringing this facilitation and really what we're terming, and I think this is how I think about facilitation generally, a facilitative leadership course. What's the connection between facilitation and leadership, and how is a facilitative perspective something we can apply more broadly? So we're going to talk about in just a second. Just to remind you, this is the third session of 4. We're on the home stretch already. This is where I want to spend some time talking about how we bring these tools together. We've spent a couple of sessions talking about what are some of the methods we can use, some tips and tricks. We've talked about what is facilitation, how to put an agenda together. How can we bring these together? What's kind of a lens we can use, or a framework we can use? I'm going to introduce something that I have always found really valuable. And then we're going to end next week with our last session, which is really going to be closing some loose ends and also giving us a chance to do some simulations, but really kind of feel out, what does it feel like to lead small group conversations? We won't be able to do it to the degree we would maybe in person, but I think it's going to be a really fun session. Today's agenda, and before I get into it, I'll just open up any announcements or anything from, in particular, anyone from Community Foundation before we get started. Okay, I'm seeing shake heads. Okay, all right, so the plan for today, welcome and agenda, we're right in the middle of that. We're going to start out the same way we did in our last meeting. One thing I think is useful, and I could include this in a later slide that I'm going to show, is it's helpful to build routines with groups, or more than routines, really kind of traditions and startup routines, established ways of checking in on where we're coming from, what meeting preceded this one, are helpful in terms of not having to restart every meeting and establishing a culture. So we're going to check in and we're going to turn to our neighbor like we did last time. I'm going to share just a quick review, a few of the kind of highlight slides of the last couple of meetings, just to get us grounded and in case anyone's missed anything. And then I want to introduce Appreciative Inquiry, which is the framework, the tool, the worldview that I'm going to present today. Some of you are probably familiar with it, and we'll spend some time talking about that before getting into an activity to think about how we could actually apply an appreciative lens to the meetings and conversations that you all have been thinking about, either planning or kind of musing abstractly. I think we have everybody on the full spectrum there, but what would an appreciative inquiry lens look like for that experience? And you'll have a better understanding of what that means when we get there. We're going to have a little discussion around that. I have a couple of slides of just some of my tips and tricks that I've pulled together over the past couple of years. And then we'll just close with some discussion, some more informal chat about what we're seeing, and the theme today being kind of how do these things tie together? How does that sound to folks? All right, any questions or additions before we get started? Okay, so let's do the blob tree again. As you know, I'm really enamored with this check-in tool, the tree of different emotional states, basically. A Kenyan friend and co-facilitator of mine, Mary Marimi, introduced me to this. We have, I think, 20 different characters here who are all having different experiences, who are all on different parts of the tree. It's all the same tree, which is, I think there's something nice about that piece of the metaphor. we're going to take this to Mentimeter like we did last time. Let's actually take a little pulse check of what we have here. And I'm just going to flip over really quickly to copy the code and link. I know you can't see anything right now. Okay. There's the website and the code in the chat if you just want to copy and paste. And I am going to just switch over to the Mentimeter page. So you'll still see the same thing, don't worry. Okay, so I'm seeing a few people coming in. Feel free. I'll linger here for another second or two. Great, seeing lots of people registering their presence. Okay, cool. You can keep logging in, but I'm going to advance the slide so that people can start responding to where are you on the tree as you're coming in this morning. Someone's just hanging on, or maybe not just hanging on there. Okay. Got some people tired at the end of the week, it looks like. All right, we have one of those 19s up there standing, stay happy on the platform. Good for them. A 9 hanging on. Thanks for showing up amidst everything else that's going on. Anyone want to react to anything you're seeing here or share what you clicked on?
I don't particularly want to share anything, but I really like this tool. This is the second time I've seen it, so I'm glad I'm seeing it again as a reminder.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that, Jasmine, and keeping us. That is the perspective we want to keep here. Yes, I'm facilitating this meeting, but ultimately, everything I'm sharing is a tool that you can rip off and take. If you haven't gotten the slides yet, you will be getting all of these slides. So, thanks for raising that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think it builds just some nice quick snapshot sensitivity to, you know, how I'm showing up isn't the only way everyone else is supposed to show up, or like just like broad range appreciation for the group. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It really is just a simple reminder that we are coming from different places. You know that kind of intellectually coming in, but this just shows us, okay, here's where folks are. Great. Anybody else want to jump in? No need to, but. Kate?
I think it's interesting to do the exercise because I think, at least for myself, I'm not always aware of how I am feeling. I mean, it's not that I'm detached from how I'm feeling. I'm not always paying attention to that when I enter into a meeting. You know, and so this gives me a moment to kind of stop and think, well, how do I actually feel today? And looking at all the different choices and going, is it that one? No, it actually isn't that one. It's more this, and it's a really nice way of kind of encouraging me to be present for that moment, and in a way that I don't think I typically do. I kind of just, you know, you just charge in and you're supposed to show up, and nobody really knows how you're feeling sometimes, including yourself.
Right. Thank you for saying that, Kate. And yeah, you show up for work and you just work, and you start, you aren't often encouraged to reflect internally, which is a really good launching point to the topic we're going to be covering today, which is really about what are the opportunities that we're creating for the people in these meetings? What is the experience that we're setting up for them? But before we do that, I want to give you a quick chance to check in with each other a little bit. And we'll do that through a way that you're already familiar with. And that is going to be turn to your neighbor. I'm going to put you in paired breakout rooms. So just a couple of people in each rooms. I'm not sure how it'll even out. There might be one of three. But just share anything about the blob tree. We've kind of covered that, so don't feel like you need to go too much into that. I'm more interested in the second part. Share something that stuck with you from the last session, or if you weren't at the last session, from the first session, or if you can't remember the last session, either of the sessions, whichever makes sense. So I'm going to put you into random breakout rooms right now, and I'm just going to give you really 2 minutes. Are there any questions about this before I put people into rooms? Okay, this should be pretty familiar at this point. Okay, welcome back. I would love to hear from a few of you, a couple of you, however many are feeling inspired, but anything that you shared or that you heard from your partner that was interesting, or that you think is kind of worth elevating. And to help us out with this, I'm just sharing in the chat the link to a Jamboard. This is just, we have a couple of Jamboards to help us take notes today, wherever we think it's helpful. When you go in there, the first thing you'll see is, in fact, I can show you. Great, I'm seeing a lot of people in here. I copied over the Jamboard that we used in our last session. We just took a couple of notes about what stuck with us from session 1. So that's just here. Nobody ever has to return to it, but if somebody does want to return to it, we have an archive. And so for today's, if anybody wants to take any notes here in this one, feel free to. But also, I'd just love to hear anybody with anything to share.
Well, I wasn't at the last session, but I talked with my colleague who was, and I don't know, well, I won't out him, but he shared with me a little tidbit that had stuck out to him, and I really appreciated that tidbit, and then I just used it in the discussion. But the agenda, not putting time constraints on the individual items, and kind of putting the ownership more on the overall facilitation to time manage versus perhaps restricting conversations if people think that they're out of time for that agenda item.
Well said. Yeah, I added that post-it note here. Thanks, Jasmine. Caroline had that too. Okay. I think it is often those little things, those little hacks that are most useful. Anyone else want to share?
I'll chime in. I think one thing that I wrote down that I remember, especially how we kicked it off today, is not only establishing and building group norms and grabbing buy-in from everyone, collecting buy-in, but honoring them in the process throughout the meeting. I believe that was session 2.
So the norms aren't just a nice thing to set up. They're not just a box to check, but we can actually, and this is really, we're going to talk a lot about this today. We can really set the tone with those expectations, and also with the way we design things. Great. Any last thoughts on this before we move on? We don't need to belabor this either, but anyone else want to share? Cool. Let's move on then. I'm seeing a lot of appreciation and agreement with the timing. So what I'm going to do now, just knowing that not only do we all have a lot going on, but we have different availability. So let's do a quick review of what we've talked about so far. First, as we were just hearing from, I think it was Jill, about the group agreements, here's what we started with. I added Sarah's suggestion from last time about have fun as a part of it. And Sarah, that was a little prophetic because we're going to be talking about something in that direction today. So I'm glad we have that on the list already. Anyone else have anything as you're reviewing this list today? Anything else to add? We're looking good. Okay, you seem to be a group that works pretty well together. So I think so far so good. Okay, so just to do a quick review. This is the slide I like to keep coming back to, both to remind us all kind of what is the definition, the literal definition of facilitate and where it comes from. It's to make things easier, easy being the root word. And I like this image from the Nonprofit Quarterly showing the ripple effects, because I think it's helpful to think of facilitation as the ripple effects that we're able to send out in our ecosystem, to our team, to our community, to our organization, to our family, people have even mentioned. What our intentionality behind that influence really determines everything. So this image, I think, and the idea of the ripple effects is behind what I'm going to be introducing as the kind of new tool and idea today. Before everything, we start with who. I am all about being human-centered in most human-centered work, but in particular, when we're talking about facilitation and designing experiences for people, that should be the primary focus, to the extent that if you remember the quote from Einstein that I shared in the last session, something about if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend the first 55 minutes defining the challenge and the last 5 minutes looking for a solution. That's really the idea here, that there's no shortage of good ideas in the world. There's no shortage of good meeting templates, meeting agendas that have worked elsewhere. But it all starts with the people that we are working with and working for. And so reminding folks of this process, human-centered design from, in this case, IDEO, the design firm based in California, but it's really taken off worldwide. What I like and what I emphasized in the last session is these first two steps, really beginning with empathy before we get to our good ideas about what we want to do or what activities we think are our strengths or are fun for a group. Start by defining, really empathizing, what does this group want out of this? What are the participants' objectives? And using that to define, all right, based on that, what kind of experience do we want to create? This process and the way it kind of flows, there's also going to be an echo of that in what I introduce in a little bit here. And then finally, I introduced what I term, and I think they even refer to it on their site as a menu of facilitation tools. And I showed really briefly, using the example of the 9 whys activity that we did as a group in the first session, how they describe the activity, each activity's objectives, the preparation for it, the instructions, and et cetera. And I just gave the suggestion that you poke around the site a little bit and see what you found. And I've heard a little bit already, and I'm sure not everyone had time to do that or remembered to do that, which is absolutely fine, or knew to do that in the first place. And I've heard a little bit of feedback already, but I'd just like to return to this and hear from anybody. What's been your experience so far with liberating structures? And just anybody. Oh, thank you for sharing that again, Caroline. Either something specific that you encountered or navigating this menu.
I'll jump in, Nate. This is Devin. yeah, had a chance to poke in there real quick and do the homework, and just to kind of check one out, and jumped on the what do I need from you. I thought that was really interesting, just as a process and tool, and I'm really excited to explore a lot more of these, but it seemed pretty evident that a lot of these strategies, build upon another, or can sort of be, involve, as part of the process with each one. So it seems, pretty rewarding that if you do get comfortable with most of these, they build upon each other. Or I think if you had good expertise, you could kind of pivot, in a process if it's not going well, or it's going a certain way, and you're like, I'm going to jump into this one instead, because given the feel for how this is going. So I was really happy to come across this.
Thank you for sharing that, Devin. Would you mind,
Sure.
and sorry to put you on the spot, but just in one sentence, what is the what I need from you based on what you remember from it?
It's being clear and concise in asking people, what they need from someone in a work situation, and not really coming up with explanations or reasons. I think there was maybe 5 responses you could have. Was yes, no, there was whatever, if the requests seemed pretty ambiguous or not clear or vague, which was kind of interesting. What are the other ones here? Yes, no, I will try, which I think is important. Someone putting forth that effort, like, I will understand or try to do my best, I think, which is meaningful. So those were it, and they had time constraints, and yeah, it wasn't an explanation. Yeah. It's like, I hear you, I will try to do this. And so pretty heavy thought work for people. I could see it getting a little spicy as well. If people really get into like a difficult, environment of, dysfunctional work stuff. So know what you're getting into.
Absolutely. I mean, there's always the potential for spice, which good and overly spiced. But there was something I want to call on there, but I'll come back to it. Thank you for sharing that. Sarah, I see your hand up.
Yeah, it's an amazing list. It's really great to have such a huge tool set all in one place. I'll admit it was a little overwhelming at first, because I'm like, what do these mean? Where do I start? I want to look at all of them. And one point I'd like to share with the group, I don't know if it's defined for some people than it was for me, but the key website, or the key that helped me, was the LS, the Liberating Selection Matchmaker. I didn't find that for a little while, and those 2 pages are kind of like the cheat sheet of what's all in that content, or each of the activities. So I needed that to understand to find what I was looking for, to find which activity would be best for what I was looking for, if that makes sense.
Yes, that totally makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. And at some point during the training, Sarah, would you mind pasting that in the chat for folks so they have that link directly? And I know, that's why they also have that matrix that I shared last time that matches what do you want to do with the activity. This is a heavy menu. And it does. Oh yeah, I remember what I was going to call out from Devin. What I something that I heard in what you were saying, what I think almost, if not all of these activities do, is simplify complex things. What you were describing, Devin, is it gives you a menu of very clear responses to what are often complex requests and needs. And so this is just streamlining that. It's making it easier, which is really why they're facilitative tools. So I just wanted to make that connection for folks. Phyllis, your hand's up too.
Thanks, Nate. I was really drawn to, after looking through a lot of these, and TRIZ as a way to like throw out the sacred cows, I guess. And reading through that, it looked like a somewhat fun way to really turn things around and see things from a different viewpoint. And I loved some of the examples they were providing for using this tool, and they were saying, like, you know, you start out this with, you know, what can we do to make this the worst possible outcome we can think of, you know, and then, you know, make the list of all those things and then say, oh, are we guilty of any of that? And so the examples that they suggested were, how can we devise policies and practices that only work for a select few? And how can we make sure we keep doing the same things with the same people while asking for different results? So, you know, somewhat Captain Obvious, but I thought it would be a good exercise to kind of make a difficult issue a little more palatable to a group to, you know, to resolve. So I appreciated that one.
Yeah, the way you described that it helps turn something on its head. That's exactly how I've used that before is, all right, we just named these problems. Obviously, some of these problems are awkward. Let's just push them to the max. And like, it's almost like you said, making a joke, a game out of it. That what if we were absolutely doing our worst? And yeah, I mean, I don't even want to spend too much time getting into it. I just enjoy that activity. So that's one we encourage you to follow up on whenever you have the time. Anyone else care to jump in? We don't have to linger too much here, but I'm enjoying hearing your reactions so far. Any critical or negative reactions are also very welcome, just because they've been appreciative so far.
I
All right.
guess, okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
My feeling that I'm having is like, this is really great. And I feel like I'm going to leave this facilitation training and I'm going to forget this, or like, it's like, you know, so much to learn that it's like, if you're going into a big meeting that you're already feeling stressed about, like, yes, it would be great if we could all pause and say, let's reflect on this thing and see what I want to use. But any strategies on how to kind of incorporate this or learn it, or like just deal with the time constraints that we all have?
Yeah, great question. The two suggestions that I would have would be pick a couple of favorites and just focus on those. I mean, a couple that I can just point to right now that I think are super basic and universal. Starting on the top row, the what cubed debrief, WWW. That's just a great debrief. Appreciative interviews, open space, critical uncertainties, 1, 2, 4 all, TRIZ, 15% solutions, 25-10 crowdsourcing, agree certainty matrix, 9 whys are the ones that I use the most, just to name those out loud if anybody was interested in them. So those are the ones that I think are most like basic and universal and that apply to, that you could just like pull as needed, you know, like the what cubed, if you're in a meeting and you're not sure how are we going to land this meeting, you know, where do we go from here? That just gives you a 3-question sequence to land from, all right, what just happened? What does it mean? What do we do? And so just having that in mind is a tool that you can pull out. So that, and Devin alluded to this earlier, but it really is familiarity with the tools. You know, as you get more comfortable with that one or the 1, 2, 4 all, and those just become kind of, you know, default, they're just tools that you have either going into or on the spot in a meeting, then you can build on them because they really are kind of building blocks in a lot of different ways. I also bookmarked this. I have this page bookmarked and like my favorite ones bookmarked to remind me because yeah, I also sometimes I'll think about an agenda and be daunted by where do I even start? What do I even need? Sometimes going to the favorites. Sharon, I see your.
Yeah, I have a question about how much buy-in you have to get from the participants, or do you need to alert them? I like the wicked questions that worked well when we were using it a couple sessions ago, and I was thinking about using that in one of my board member meetings, and I just know there's going to be pushback. Well, why are you asking this? How much blah, blah, blah. So how much buy-in do you have to get from your audience?
I think transparency helps a lot with that buy-in, that here's a tool, here's a process that is vetted, that, you know, I can share resources and links on, whether it's wicked questions or something else, and let them know that this is what we're going to be doing. So then they're not caught flat. They might still be caught flat-footed by the challenging question, but at least they know that challenging questions are coming their way. And then that, you know, that's a different expectation, I think. So across the board, I like to show my cards, you know, whatever the facilitative tool or technique is, share it with people, because then you're demystifying it and that is the buy-in. Like, here's what I'm trying to do, folks. I need your help to do it. Obviously, here's what I'm attempting to do. I can't do it alone. So that would be my suggestion, Sharon.
Okay.
Anybody else? I mean, also, anybody else have any answers or reactions to some of the questions that have come up? We can crowdsource some of this wisdom as well if anything is coming to mind. Heather, I see you raising a hand.
Hi. I missed last week, unfortunately, so I haven't gotten a chance to play in this. But one thing, and I don't know if maybe this helps with the last question at all, but one thing that I found really helpful when trying something new or being nervous about like putting a new way of teaching something out there, and this has worked for me with like kids and teens and adults, is just letting them know that you're like, hey, I really want to try this new thing and I want to see how it goes. Like, will you join that with me? And I found that really helps people, I think, like pull everyone onto your side. And now they want to try this new thing with you. And I've always found that really helpful for me. And I feel like, quite honestly, it takes a lot of the pressure off me as well, knowing that everyone knows. I'm like, yeah, I just want to see what happens.
Absolutely. So that's adding vulnerability to the transparency, that I'm trying to do this and this is my first time. I'm trying this out, and that vulnerability gets buy-in too. All right, I see Sarah and then Devin, and then we're going to move on for time. And I'm going to start responding to Aaron's request in the chat as well. Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I just want to commend the collaborative for helping model some of these techniques in their. And I know the fishbowl, the youth fishbowl that they do, I think almost every year, is a great way for us all to remember, you know, techniques like this and how they work and how powerful they can be. So it's neat to see them in action in our community, these types of techniques.
Sorry, Nate, I had a quick question. There's always more than one meeting. It never seems just to be one meeting, you know. Do you suggest kind of, I know, just finding that one strategy and keep working it if it works well? Because I think it could be kind of confusing just to keep adding new, like last time we tried this strategy. I mean, do you have any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, each of them does something different. And so being really mindful that each of these is a tool to accomplish something in particular. So yes, some of them are more universal than others. And you know, those are the ones maybe you go to and hone, like you're referring to. But yeah, I guess I would just be mindful of it as a toolkit. In terms of people feeling like jilted, I in my experience, it facilitates adult learning, which is really what meetings are. Adult learning happens when adults are stimulated and encountering something new. And so new formats, new ways of presenting information, new ways of stimulating participation, all of that, I think, just improves it. Figure out your own pace. You know, remember, it all starts with who your audience is going to determine the pace of change. Maybe you introduce one new thing a month, but I think for the most part, people are hungry for something new. New doesn't mean more, you know, it doesn't mean we're doing more work or packing more into the meeting. It really just means we have a better way of accomplishing what we want to.
Good point, thanks.
Would be my answer, yeah. All right, great conversation. Aaron, I think I got halfway through. Wait, let me actually just finish this list to make sure that I get it through as long as I'm here. agree certainty matrix. I'm using the agree certainty matrix with another client next week, actually. Okay, those are the ones I use the most, but they're all great. Okay, so what I want to do now is move to the new tool, the new frame that I want to introduce. I'm less concerned about the pace of introducing new tools with you all, since that's our objective here. But for me, this is something that's really kind of comprehensive and is really a lens that applies to everything that we've talked about so far, including those different tools and methods, or many of them at least, less the TRIZ, as you'll see in a second, and I'll connect that for you. What we're going to talk about right now is something called appreciative inquiry. And some of you, like I said, might be familiar with this already. I really like this metaphor of the plant growing toward the light as a metaphor for what appreciative inquiry is. It's phototropism for people, that we grow toward energy, we grow toward a positive vision of the future. And there's a theory and a whole methodology built out around this. Having this little plant reaching out to the window is actually a helpful image for me in really very simply understanding why this. And we've heard this from a few different people earlier. You know, Kate was mentioning, how do I feel? And like really reflecting on how do I feel? I don't actually maybe pause to think about that all the time. Creating the opportunity for her to connect with how she feels is going to change the outcome of the meeting, because Kate is showing up differently than she would have if she were just kind of, you know, showing up with her autopilot professional hat on, which, Kate, I'm sure is not how you show up to anything, but just as an archetype. So this is really about that environment that we're creating. And so let's break this down literally. So appreciative inquiry plus appreciation. And actually, oh no, credit comes later. Inquiry, it's about finding out, asking questions, discovering. So this is already tipping us off that this is a facilitative process. This is a process and a perspective that is about guiding people to discover things. We're asking questions. That's already telling us something. What are we asking questions on? Well, we're asking questions that are appreciative, that are focusing on values, that are focusing on assets and strengths and best practices. So really appreciating the best of something, recognizing that things are broken, things could be better. There are, in many cases, there are serious problems that need to be addressed and dealt with. And I have a serious caveat about appreciative inquiry at the end of this. But in general, as we're going into a meeting, if we're thinking about the architecture and the flow and the kind of environment, the little subculture that we're creating in the meeting, appreciative inquiry is an approach that helps us direct toward a collective, constructive outcome. So I think this is the 5 principles of appreciative inquiry are, besides the kind of metaphor itself or the idea itself, are what I find most useful and as kind of guiding principles for a lot of my facilitation. So the first is, and for each of them, because this came out of Case Western University, I think I wrote down, yeah, David Cooper Ryder and Diana Whitney wrote the book on this several years ago. And because it came from an academic origin, obviously each principle needs kind of a philosophic name. But we have the constructionist principle here, which really just means the words create worlds. The questions I ask, the way I describe things, are putting images in your heads and leading you to certain ways of thinking, not in a manipulative way. I'm not good enough at it to be doing that. It's just the way we work as humans. That the images, if I start talking about facilitation as something scary that, you know, that is what brings together our fears of public speaking and our fears of being embarrassed in public and not knowing what to do. And how are you feeling about that? Are you feeling good about facilitation right now as you hear me describe those things? That's a quick, easy example of how the words we choose, the direction we take, really matters. And I have a really good example of this from last night. And this is actually related to the caveat as well. So I was at a community meeting last night of around 25 Latino community members of a community outside DC that I'm working with. It's a collective impact initiative. So these are the community leaders, community members who are stepping up as kind of neighborhood ambassadors. And we were onboarding a lot of them to the process. And a few of them were teenagers, which was great and exciting. And one of the teenagers came up to me afterward and he said, "Can I give you some feedback?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And he said, "It was pretty much just these adults sitting around complaining, which is kind of what they do all the time." And I was like, "Yeah, that is kind of what we do all the time, isn't it?" And also, thank you for catching that is what happened in this meeting. And I didn't tell him this, but it was because we being the group who was responsible for the meeting, didn't go in with the intentionality, and we weren't on the same page. Somebody went a little bit rogue, and it ended up being fine, because in this case, the community was coming together for, a lot of these folks were together for the first time, and they needed to vent. And so this is the caveat, that appreciative inquiry and that lens does not mean that we are only positive and neglecting critique. I've seen, and only once, but really effectively, someone use the excuse that they were using appreciative inquiry to shut down dissent in a meeting. That, well, we're really trying to be appreciative, so that's not what we don't need that right now, just directly, which is really, really not what appreciative inquiry is about. And so just maintaining that distinction, it's about setting intentions, setting, it's really about thinking about the shape of the facilitated event, the experience we want to put together. It's not about policing non-appreciative contributions. But I thought this teenager's feedback last night was just such a good example of, he's ready for positive, constructive, solutions-oriented conversations, which is what they're actually signing up for in the working groups and in the collective impact. But they needed that space, and maybe they needed it and were granted it last night. I was generally more on the teenagers' side, but that's following the who. The group needed to vent. That's fine. Maybe that tonight isn't the night for appreciative inquiry. In our next meeting, we're going to start to build, though. And so just being mindful of that and the different needs that people bring in. I love this principle, the simultaneity principle, which is that inquiry creates change. By asking the question, I'm already changing your mind, just because you are already thinking in terms of responding to that question. This also is not something magical or manipulative. It's directing your attention. So inquiry creates change. By asking a question in a certain direction, I'm guiding your attention, you're changing. I think there's something pretty interesting about that. Cool. Thanks for the update, Allison. I appreciate people trying to juggle multiple commitments here. The next principle is the Poetic Principle, which is really just as simple as we can choose what we study. So we can choose what we are paying attention to. If we're coming in as a group, we can set the intention of, let's pay attention to where's collaboration working well in our team. We can pay attention to where are individuals really living into our values. Where is that happening? Let's look at that. Let's build on that. That kind of, we have that power. Not in a dictatorial policing way, which I'm going to keep reminding you, because I think it's tempting as a facilitator to want that control. But this is about your intentions and how you set out. The second to last, and these are all pretty related, as you can tell, but the Anticipatory Principle, images inspire action. So humans move in the direction of the visions we have in our head. the vision, whatever the abstract vision that I've built together over the years of what my career is, that's what I'm working toward, consciously or not, whatever, you know, what. So yes, I think that's pretty obvious. Images inspire action. So what this means facilitatively is what we stimulate and encourage people to think about, what we encourage them to imagine, it inspires their action, that influences their action. So encouraging people to, well, actually, what time do we have? Let's just pause for a moment, actually. I see Kate raising your hand. I'm going to get to this in just a second. No, don't worry. I'd actually like to just practice this for a quick second. And if everyone could indulge me and just close your eyes for just a moment. Close your eyes, take one deep breath in, let it out, let it in, let it out. I want you to picture the Tahoe Truckee community at its best in your experience. What was happening? What are you hearing? Are there any smells? Any other sensations? How are you feeling emotionally being in that community? All right, open your eyes. We just took, I think, 15 seconds, maybe 20 seconds. Could anybody share just how you feel after envisioning that for even just a couple of questions? And feel free to in the chat, whatever. Was your mind starting to float in the direction? Were you starting to feel, how concrete was it when I was asking you to really sense this experience, the community, the best of it? Eliza, and then we can go back to Kate. Kate, you might not have. Okay, great. Eliza, go ahead.
Well, it was a very positive, sort of meditative, active state, and very much the state of finding ourselves in a room with you, with TTCF. And I mean, just the fact that we're doing this together, it's very inspiring. I mean, you can't go wrong with this kind of asset-based approach. That's all.
Thank you for sharing that and for connecting it to the asset-based approach. That's absolutely, they're in the same family. Kate, what would you like to share?
Just briefly, in my past life, I trained in family systems therapy, and one of the things that this reminds me of was a set of questions. It was called future questioning, and I always found it the most exciting and sort of freeing line of questioning. And it was really like, you know, when X is no longer happening, what is happening differently? Like, it was it put you into the future. It put you into a time in which whatever the struggle was no longer so active, so prominent, and what was happening differently. So it asked you to imagine how everything else had shifted, and it gave you a roadmap in that moment to what needed to be different in order to feel different. This seems very similar to that.
I really like that future questioning. I'll look that up. And the way you said to put you in the future, so then you can break it down from there. That's the roadmap. I think that's very similar. I just want to call in a couple of comments. Gavin was saying, Sharon reminded why I'm here, grounded, great to recenter into a positive, loving place from busy, calm and spacious. It was kindness I was focused on. So as facilitators, we can imagine the impact that has on a group, and on the meeting and on what we're trying to accomplish and where we're headed from here. You know, I think Kathy's the way you put it is really helpful. If you're coming in busy, focused on the busy, that's already, I mean, we already know where we're headed. If we can pause and create space, then we're pivoting people's attention. That's really a big part of it. So the last one, and this is, I think, kind of redundant at this point, is the positive principle, that positive questions lead to positive change. I think that's what Kate was alluding to with when we think about the future and what's different there, that's telling us where we need to head, that the positive future is what do we need to do to build that future? That's something I also, the same line of questioning I use with collective impact initiatives to figure out, define your theory of change. What do you want your community to look like? What does it look like in this topic area? And then let's work backward from, okay, what are the pieces of that? What does transportation look like? What does nutrition look like, et cetera? So any other questions or reactions to appreciative inquiry and the principles? I think it's both. Oh, and actually, I did include a couple more slides here. Appreciative inquiry also includes a cycle. The methodology includes, and this is what I referred to at the beginning, that it's kind of, it reminds me of the human-centered design cycle quite a bit. It will be reminiscent of any design cycle for you, but the core of it is really around discovering what gives life. What is the best of what this is? I think that's just a really great starting point. What is the best of this? And then dreaming, what might be? Then you're starting to build together and then designing from there. So I'm not going to get into this part of it because it was really the principles that I wanted to emphasize today. But this is another aspect of it that's worth digging into, and that I also think can be helpful in terms of thinking about a process and how you even flow through a meeting or a series of meetings. Any questions before I send us into a little activity to put some of this to work, or at least to try that? Cool, because I want to focus on the activity. So what I'd like to do now is to give you all a few minutes in small groups. And at this point, I'm probably going to give you 10 or 12 minutes because I have some facilitation tips and tricks that I want to get to at the end. Just being mindful of trying to lob as many resources and ways of thinking about things at you as possible. So in about 10 minutes in groups of 3, thinking about, so I keep referring to a meeting or an event that I've asked you to have in mind as kind of something to learn with, a learning object over the course of this training. So hopefully you have some meeting or some part of something in mind at this point. And when you get into these small groups, you're going to start by sharing, first, articulate your upcoming meeting's biggest objective. And do it by saying, in my wildest dreams, this meeting will, what is the wildest, best version of this meeting? So unbounded by reality. So after you've articulated that, then take a few minutes to work together to come up with 3 appreciative inquiry questions for each of those audiences. So if that's your objective, what are some questions that might get people toward thinking in that direction? It can be helpful to think of this cycle, which I didn't emphasize, I know, so this isn't the test, but thinking in terms of, discovery questions. What's the best about this? What gives it life? Moving to what might it be from here to what should it be? That's a helpful kind of process. But we're not thinking about that too much. I'm just interested in some appreciative questions about this, your meeting topic. And as you're thinking about it, remember that it's helpful to tap into people's emotions, like we did in that quick simulation, that quick reflection. So be mindful of that as you're thinking about your questions. Are there any questions that you have now about this before I send you into groups? I'm going to share, I'm going to copy and paste that into the chat right now. I know you can't see it. Okay, great. If there aren't questions, then I am going to put you in breakout rooms of 3. And I will see you here in about 10 minutes. All right, here we go. See you in a little bit. All right, welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. As always, that probably wasn't enough time to do the assignment, but anyone want to share how that went or how that compares to how you might be thinking about an event usually or how you were before? Any reflections on what you just did in your small groups? Eliza.
Hi. Well, I mean, we only had time to come up with 2 questions because we were too interested in getting to know each other, which is so delightful and also a challenge. So the questions we came up with sort of, I think we had a sort of agreement. A definition question in terms of what will success look like for this meeting, and then a dream question in terms of envisioning what success might look like, bearing in mind a successful outcome today, 6 months from now or a year from now. But I have to say that these things seem so obvious, and yet when we have meetings normally, we just rush into the agenda items and don't give ourselves pause for thought. So yeah, great.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that, Eliza. And one way of looking at this, I think that, or the way that I look at it is the way of dealing with, or I guess we don't fight complexity, but the way of working with complexity isn't to add more complexity. It's not, we can only do it by fighting complexity with simplicity. I think that's really what facilitation is there's this big mess. What is the container we can create? What is the path we can create? What are the new relationships we can create from the chaotic thing? And those are the simple things that we ignore most, simple between quotation marks, of course, but that we neglect a lot of the time. So thanks for raising that, Eliza. Jasmine, I see your hand up.
I've got this meeting coming up that has given me all kinds of anxiety because it's a huge complex issue with a lot of emotion attached to it. And I was sharing with my group and then, laughing about the idea of, starting the meeting of in my wildest dreams, this is what we're going to accomplish. And then like having that as an icebreaker for the meeting and just like how that would shift the dynamic and add an element of fun that probably wouldn't happen in that meeting that's going to happen.
I think that sounds really exciting. And another element, if you have the time and want to take it, is do a turn to your neighbor and share with your neighbor what's your wildest dream for this meeting. And then not everybody needs to share out because that'll take too long, but ask for 3 or 4. And all of a sudden we all are oriented towards some wildest dreams. We're not going, and then you make a joke about, well, obviously we're not going to accomplish those, but we're going to do our best to, but I think that sounds great. That's really creative. Any other thoughts on this piece before I do have a couple more slides that are more of a series of bullet points of tips and whatnot. Sharon.
I was really happy to be with 2 people that I didn't know, but who we determined have very similar goals for the meetings that we're looking forward to. And it made me not feel quite so alone, like I'm out there dealing with this, trying to get this accomplished at the meeting all by myself. It sounds like it's a common problem, and hopefully putting these things into effect will help us get past the roadblock that we've had.
That's such a great insight. Thank you, Sharon. And you know, as a facilitator, one of my objectives is also building relationships among all of you. And so that is not feeling alone in all of this is definitely one of the experiences we can create for people, or create avenues for it. We can't create anything, but we can create opportunities for things like that to happen. Thank you for sharing. And I want to call in here from the chat. I like thinking about some of these questions intentionally in advance. Yeah, Heather, I like the way you said that. I mean, sometimes, yes, for maybe a big event, there is the element of, you know, looking through the menu of liberating structures and really being thoughtful and methodical. But sometimes it's just really pausing to think about what are the questions and what is the flow. I think for most routine meetings that I, you know, when I worked in an organization, I would go in with 3 bullet points, not complicated activities, but intentions about how I wanted conversation to flow and the questions and whatnot. So that's good. And a way to offer that question to the group we are facilitating for, yeah, the wildest dream. I agree. Okay, great. So let's close out and let's keep this discussion going. I'm just going to be sharing a different kind of information. So this one, obviously, we've talked about, but it connects well to what Eliza was just mentioning about these things seem so obvious. They seem like the things that we know are useful, but I think connecting them to relationship building, synthesizing, collective, like doing things collectively, all things that are simple and streamlining activities, that helps us cut through the complexity. So relating those two, I think, is a helpful heuristic to not go too crazy trying to manage complex situations in groups. Another way to do that, that I have always found useful, is to think of your event as a narrative that you're weaving together. So like, what is the story of this event? What is the story of this training or this meeting? What are the high points, and where, you know, how does one thing lead to another? I'm big on having transitions that lead to one thing, or everything being kind of a theme, icebreakers that are related to the content or the objective. So thinking of it as a narrative, how are these things connected and really woven together in a way that feels cohesive and that makes sense to people? Know and respect your audience. I think this one also feels obvious, but is really important, especially when for those of us who might be in professional chairs working with community members, and I put quotation marks because we're all both of those things in different contexts. But really respecting your audience, even when we're working with, as those of you who work with children and youth, your audience's interior lives are just as rich as your own. And so recognizing that, and also, as we've heard a couple of times, inviting them in as co-facilitators, that they're co-creating this event. This wouldn't work without your questions, without your feedback, et cetera. So showing your respect that way. I find it really useful, and we heard this earlier, I forget who exactly, from a couple of people, about establishing yourself with transparency and vulnerability. I added curiosity here. I think entering with curiosity is the best way to get started, is the best position to have as a facilitator. You're not there to be the authority on things. Sometimes we are meant to be the authorities, we're the experts on whatever content it is. But I think for the most part, as when we're in the facilitator seat, we're there to be asking questions. And so coming with curiosity and really even being mindful about that going in, like, okay, I'm gonna go in curious about this. I already have some questions, sets you in a different mindset and prepares you differently. And also being vulnerable, sharing either I'm a little nervous, or this is the first time I'm trying this, or I'm feeling this way today, whatever. That vulnerability helps break down. I think there's oftentimes kind of like a Wizard of Oz situation with facilitation. Like there's something more going on behind the curtain than there really is. Like, no, it's just the same dude. There's not much there. So being vulnerable and showing that. This one I'm a big fan of. Data in any form that's intelligible to everyone and that you analyze collectively is a catalyst for understanding and change. So what this means is it's the reflecting on data that makes people inspired to change, not receiving data in a report, but collectively reflecting on it is the catalyst for a bunch of stuff. And that could be data of many different kinds. The example I'll use to emphasize, an organization I used to work for works with civil society organizations, helping them develop feedback loops with their constituents. And what I love about the methodology we used to use is that with one question, we could just ask, like the net promoter question, to what extent, what is the likelihood that you would recommend this organization's services to a family member or friend? Based on that one question, as a facilitator, I don't care, frankly, what the answer to that question is. But that one data point is something that I can show back to a group of community members and say, what's up with that? Where might that be coming from? What do you think that is? That one data point, them thinking about why it might be that way, is opening it up. That's a really good way to tap into people's reflections, is give them something to react to. I'll pause for questions and reactions in a second here. I just have a few more. Knowing what to synthesize, when, and to what degree takes time. That's really something to continue feeling out and to really be mindful of. It's kind of a sense and it's kind of second nature, what's the kernel of what someone says that I want to synthesize? When do I need to synthesize, or when don't I? Just sharing with you that that's something that takes time. Don't beat yourself up about it if it's not something that you feel very comfortable with. Naming and bringing power dynamics into the room is a superpower of the facilitator. Even if you are in the midst of those power dynamics. So you're facilitating for a group of leaders or a group of leaders within your organization even. Naming the power dynamics in the room is something you can do as a facilitator that you can't always do as a participant. And that just calling things as they are is a really helpful contribution of a facilitator. Just saying, I know we have folks who are on the front lines and some middle management folks and some senior leadership folks today. I know you don't always meet around tables like this. Today, we're going to meet around tables like this. Just naming that, just saying that, it doesn't resolve it, but at least it's now in the room and we can deal with it if and when it comes up. With virtual meetings, more frequency is better than more intensity. So rather than having a long 4-hour meeting that we pack everything into, having 4 1-hour meetings that are spread over a month is a much better idea. As we know, people's attentions, well, we can't expect people to be in front of their computer screens for that long. It's inhumane. I often say follow the energy. So that means paying attention. Feedback loops, for me, a feedback loop can be formal feedback that I ask at the end of a session, but it could also be watching people's faces, even on Zoom, watching people's faces after I describe something or after I, attempt a joke. That is feedback for me to say, okay, I have their attention, or I have her attention, or we're headed, it's just constantly paying attention. And relatedly, it's an opportunity to model humility and sincerity by asking for feedback and then acting on it. And so just as a very quick example of this, I wasn't planning on using these 2 slides of just kind of dense information. I think this might just be a helpful list. These are things to be aware of. They're things in your notes, but I included them based on the lowest feedback number from our last session, which was about, I learned something new or useful. So I thought, well, let's just throw let's throw a little bit more at them so that you have a list of new things. That's me not just responding to feedback, but making sure that this is what is most useful to you all. That's building our trust between all of us, that I genuinely am here to try to make a useful experience for you. And you need to tell me how it's going in order to do that. And the more that we can do that, we can really build a virtuous cycle with the people we're working with, where we just have a better communication loop eventually. And that's where I'm going to pause pretty much for the day. We can use the Jamboard if we want to. I have one feedback question on the end, just so you all know what we have left on the day. So in the 4 or 3 minutes we have left, any questions, clarifying or otherwise, about that stream of bullet points I just threw at you?
I've got
Yes,
one. So just in terms of naming the power dynamics, what do you think it would have worked with that group of adults and teens to name the fact that, okay, it seems like this process today is going to be all about venting? I don't know how you say it that way, but would that have helped the teens at that moment in that meeting?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. He gave me that piece of feedback at the end of the session, so I'm not sure what we could have done at that point, except, I mean, you're making me think about naming. It would definitely be better in the future. And this is exactly what naming the power, even just saying, and we did say this, but I don't think we acknowledged that the different perspectives as much, that we have adults who are experienced public speakers in the room, and we have teenagers, and we have some younger kids in the room who are all here as participants. We want to hear all their voices. I think we left it there, when what we probably should have added is, and we know that there's a diversity of perspectives. And we, this was implied, but like, yeah, I'm not sure how that would have helped that specific problem. But in the future, I mean, if the adults are driving the bus too much in the next meeting, then we say, hey, adults, we've talked about how, there's a lot of adults with power in here. And I think really, to go back to the metaphor that I used when I introduced that, it's really about naming it so that it's in the room. Let's name it so that it's on the table. And once it's on the table, metaphorically, then it's something that we can address, we can play with it, we can set it aside if we need to, but it's something that's named that we're all looking at. I mean, not in a concrete sense, but I think that's what makes it most useful. And that applies to not just the power dynamics, but the obvious, what's going unsaid. All right. Any last thoughts on this? Again, I really appreciate the way so many of you, and I think all of you, are staying engaged through a Friday morning virtual meeting. I really appreciate it. All right. So the last thing I could use today is just the feedback, the same way we have before. I will advance the slide there. And I'll put on, so it should be the same information. This is the same, everything that was there before. Eliza, I see you raising your hand.
Yes, just a note of appreciation in the same way that you've thanked us for being on a Zoom call today. You've presented the most extraordinary amount of very deep information, and in a sense, it's presented in a very theoretical format, because there's so much knowledge there, and of course that's a contradiction to the incredibly practical nature of what you've offered as well. So I think you've handled it with extraordinary finesse and dexterity. So well done.
I really appreciate that, Eliza. Thank you very much. That's what you aspire to do. And I think that's even Eliza's observation about having the high level container and the theoretical stuff and the practical stuff within that. I mean, there's something about facilitation in general in that observation. So thank you for that. And thank you all. I know we are at this point, I think 1 minute over. So if anyone has to leave, the homework for our last session, which will be next Friday, is I would love if you could put to use, and I know some of you already have, try out anything that you have learned in the last 3 sessions in an actual meeting. Anything at all. It could be the simplest of verbal tics that I have, or an actual methodology. Just try something out, whether or not you're even in the facilitator seat. I think, facilitation, I think sometimes means leading from behind too. How can you nudge a process with a facilitative mindset as a participant? That's also something to think about. But with that, I will play some outro music, unless